sun-kissed and happy, thinking I'd be begging for help. But when she opened the refrigerator to get some dinner, she screamed in horror at what she saw inside. Greetings, dear listeners. Before I begin my story, a story of betrayal and how I one day chose myself, I ask you to support this channel. Please subscribe and hit the like button. It helps stories like this be heard. And write in the comments what city or country you're listening from. It always warms my spirit to see how many of us there are. And now, enjoy the story. The front door had slammed shut 3 hours ago, but the heavy, sugary scent of Quintessa's perfume still hung in the hallway. That fragrance always seemed too intrusive to me, too loud for our old brownstone with its high ceilings, where the air was used to smelling like the dust of ages and dried lavender. I stood in the middle of the kitchen, staring at the closed door of the pantry. The silence in the house was absolute, ringing. I used to love this silence. It meant peace after a long day at the sewing machine, when my eyes were tired from tiny stitches and my back ached from the endless stooping. But today, the silence felt predatory. It was waiting. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. It's shameful to admit, but I was hungry. Just ordinary human hunger, the kind that gets persistent by evening. I walked over to the cabinet. The hinges creaked as if complaining about the disturbance. The shelves were impeccably clean and terrifyingly empty. Quintessa had packed in a rush. She had darted around the apartment like a bright tropical bird trapped in a cage, tossing bikinis, light sundresses, and tanning lotions into her suitcase. I remembered how she stopped in the doorway, already wearing her shoes, and held out her hand. "Mama, give me your card just in case. What if the ATM down there doesn't work or something?" "But Quintessa," I tried to object, feeling a chill run down my spine. "That's my whole Social Security check. What am I supposed to live on for 2 weeks?" "Oh, don't start," she rolled her eyes, snatching the plastic card from my fingers. "You've got a full jar of grits. Boil them up, add a little butter, and it's beautiful. It'll be good for you to detox. Doctors advise a diet for everyone at your age. Don't invent problems where there aren't any. I deserve this vacation." And she left. She flew off to Miami, to the sun, to cocktails with little umbrellas, taking my money, my peace of mind, and, as it turned out, my food with her. Grits. Right, she mentioned grits. I reached for the top shelf where the old glass jar stood labeled grits in my own handwriting some 20 years ago. The jar felt suspiciously light. I took off the lid and looked inside. At the bottom, amid some grayish dust, lay a few lonely grains. There wasn't enough to feed a sparrow, let alone a grown woman. She had lied. Or maybe she just didn't care. She hadn't even bothered to check if there was food before condemning me to this starvation diet. She just threw words out to silence my anxiety and forgot about me the second she called her Uber. My chest went cold. It wasn't the kind of cold you get from a draft. It was ice that starts growing from the inside when you realize that the person you carried, nursed, and raised isn't just selfish, they are cruel. I closed the jar and put it back. The sound of glass against wood rang out like a gunshot. I had to do something. Maybe some loose change. Quintessa often scattered coins, shaking them out of her jeans pockets. I headed to her room. Chaos reigned here. Clothes were strewn on chairs, open tubes of lipstick on the vanity, crumpled receipts on the floor. I started methodically searching the surfaces under a stack of glossy magazines. Nothing. In the jewelry dish, empty. My gaze fell on a crumpled piece of paper carelessly thrown at the trash bin, but missing the mark. I bent down and picked it up. It was a printout of the hotel reservation and flight itinerary. I smoothed the sheet out on the tabletop. The letters danced before my eyes, but I saw the total figure immediately. It was bold, black, and merciless. The amount my daughter had spent on 2 weeks of beach relaxation was exactly equal to 3 months of my benefits. 3. I stood in the semi-darkness of her room, and it felt like the walls were closing in. For years, I had darned my old stockings. I had turned coats inside out to remake them, coats I'd been wearing since before the turn of the century. I denied myself an extra peach to buy her the best shoes for school, then for college, then just because. Mama, this is what's in style now. I walked out of her room, pulling the door firmly shut behind me, as if cutting myself off from that smell of carelessness and betrayal. The living room met me with silent grandeur. I walked in. Here, in the light of the street lamps filtering through the heavy velvet curtains, stood them, my treasures, my jailers. The antique oak buffet, carved and heavy as a tombstone. Inside, behind the glass, the crystal and fine Haviland Limoges porcelain gleamed dully. A service for 12, which we had eaten from maybe twice in our lives. This is for Quintessa's wedding, I used to tell myself. The wedding never happened, but the china waited. On the dresser stood a silver tea service that had come down to me from my grandmother. Next to it, a jewelry box with pieces I never wore because where would an old woman like me go in this? Let it stay for the grandchildren. In the hall closet hung fur coats, smelling of mothballs, which Quintessa contemptuously called dust collectors, but which were worth a fortune. I looked around my living room. This wasn't a home. It was a museum, the Quintessa Johnson Museum. And I wasn't the mistress of the house. I was the unpaid curator. A curator who shuffles around in worn-out slippers, wipes dust off the exhibits, and starves to death so that one day a visitor can come and take everything without even saying thank you. My stomach growled treacherously again, but now something else was mixed with the sound. Anger? No, anger is a hot feeling. This was clarity. Icy, crystal clear clarity. I walked over to the coffee table where a stack of old newspapers lay. Quintessa always scolded me for not throwing them out. Junk, trash, she would snort. But I knew that in the classified section there was something I needed. I had seen the ad a week ago, circled it in pencil just because, out of habit, never admitting the thought that I might need it. I sorted through the papers. There it was, the City Chronicle, the page with private ads. The red pencil circle was barely visible in the dim light, but I knew what it said. Mr. Alistair Sterling. I buy antiques, porcelain, silver, rarities. Honest appraisal. House calls. I looked at the telephone. Old, rotary, reliable grits, you say? I whispered into the void. I picked up the receiver. The dial tone was long and steady. I started turning the dial, entering the number, digit after digit. Every turn of the dial took effort, as if I were cracking a safe where my own life had been locked away. It started ringing. 1, 2, 3. Hello? A male voice answered, slightly raspy but polite. Listening. I took a deep breath of air that smelled like the dust of my museum. Good evening. My voice sounded unexpectedly firm, even to myself. Is this Mr. Sterling? My name's Yuli. Do you buy silver flatware? I do. Professional interest appeared in his voice. What period are we talking about? I looked at the empty velvet case where the spoon should have been, then shifted my gaze to the buffet. Yes, early 20th century, I said. I want to sell it. Mr. Sterling turned out to be punctual. At exactly 9 in the morning, the doorbell sliced through the silence of the brownstone, making me flinch. I hadn't slept all night, sitting in the armchair opposite the buffet like a sentry guarding treasures before surrendering them to the enemy. But the enemy was no longer poverty. The enemy was my own submissiveness. I opened the door. On the threshold stood a man of about 60 in a neat gray overcoat and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked intellectual, distinguished, but his eyes, keen, observant, betrayed a man used to appraising not just things, but people. Mrs. Yuli? He asked, tilting his head slightly. I am Alistair. We spoke yesterday. Come in. Don't take off your shoes. I stepped back, letting him inside. He walked into the living room, and I saw his gaze slide over the walls, the heavy furniture, the paintings. He had expected to see another grandmother with cheap trinkets, silver-plated knickknacks, and a hope to get at least a penny. But when he saw the furnishings, his eyebrows rose ever so slightly. You have an interesting home, he noted cautiously. "This isn't a home," I replied dryly. "It's a storage facility." I walked to the sideboard and took out the heavy case lined with worn velvet. The latch clicked. I threw back the lid. On the dark green lining lay 12 silver spoons. They were massive, with intricate engraving on the handles, the monograms of my great-grandparents intertwined with grapevines. Quintessa adored them. She often took out this set, stroked the cold metal with her fingers, and said, "When I get married, Mama, we'll eat cake with these on our anniversary." This was her dowry, a dowry she hadn't even bothered to take with her while leaving to burn through my money. Mr. Sterling put on white cotton gloves, took a loop from his pocket, and leaned over the table. Silence hung in the room, broken only by his breathing and the soft clink of metal as he carefully turned a spoon. "Gorham, Chantilly pattern," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "Early production. The condition is marvelous. These have hardly been used." "Never," I corrected. "They were admired." He straightened up, took off his glasses, and looked at me with new interest. "A rare and expensive item. Usually in these cases they offer the scrap price, but that would be sacrilege. I can offer you—" He named a sum. The sum was impressive. It equaled 5 of my monthly checks. A month ago, I would have fainted from happiness. I would have grabbed that money and hidden under the mattress for a rainy day. But today, something different woke up inside me. Years spent at fabric markets where I haggled for every inch of silk from my clients to save them a dime suddenly made themselves known. "No," I said firmly. Alistair blinked. "Excuse me?" "This is Gorham, early period," I repeated his words, looking him straight in the eye. "A full set in the original case, without a single scratch. You will sell these to a collector for 3 times what you offered me. I'm not asking for the market price, Mr. Sterling. I'm asking for a fair dealer's price." I named my figure. It was 40% higher than his offer. He chuckled. Wrinkles gathered at the corners of his eyes. "You, Mrs. Yulee, are not as simple as you seem." "Life teaches you," I parried. "All right," he said, pausing for a second, weighing whether to haggle, but apparently realized that before him stood not a desperate old lady, but a business partner. "Deal." 10 minutes later, he left, taking the case with him, and I remained standing in the middle of the room, clutching a thick stack of bills in my hand. My heart was pounding somewhere in my throat. It wasn't fear, it was adrenaline. Pure, intoxicating energy. I had just sold Quintessa's dowry. I had sold a piece of family history, and I didn't feel a drop of guilt. I felt the weight that pressed on my shoulders for years become just a little lighter. I didn't hide the money. I put it in my purse, put on my best coat, beige cashmere, kept for special occasions, and walked out of the house. My legs carried me on their own, but not to the usual discount supermarket with yellow price tags and wilted cabbage. I was walking downtown to the Epicurean market. I hadn't been there in 15 years. The prices there bit so hard, it was scary to even look at the windows. But today, I wasn't planning to look. The heavy doors swung open before me, and I was washed over by the smell of fresh baking, coffee, and expensive spices. I walked past the shelves like a queen returning from exile. I didn't look at potatoes. I didn't look for discounts on pasta. I went to the deli counter. "Weigh me 1/2 pound of prosciutto di Parma, please, and some of that Virginia ham." Then came the cheese section. I took a wedge of aged Parmesan and a soft brie with truffles. I grabbed a jar of almond-stuffed olives. I bought a fresh baguette, still warm, crusty, and then I saw them. Quiches, huge, velvety, filled with sunshine, lying on a woven tray. Out of season, of course, imported. They cost as much as an airplane wing. 2, I said, the most beautiful. And finally, the seafood section. Cold smoked salmon, thin slices, translucent in the light, the color of sunset. I walked out of the market with 2 paper bags. They weren't heavy, but they held more life than all my stocks of grits over the last 10 years. At home, I didn't eat in the kitchen on the oilcloth tablecloth. I went into the living room. I took a snow-white tablecloth with handmade lace out of the sideboard. Quintessa forbade me to use it. You'll stain it, Mama. That's for guests. Today, I am the guest, I said aloud to the empty room. I spread the tablecloth, took out the best plate from that very service, thin porcelain with a gold rim. I laid out a silver fork. I still had forks. Knives and dessert spoons were also plentiful. I had only sold the teaspoons. I laid out my purchases. I rolled the slices of ham into rosettes, cut the cheese to cubes, olives, salmon, warm bread that I broke with my hands, crumbling right onto the tablecloth, and the peach. I bit into it and sweet juice splashed on my lips. The taste was incredible. It wasn't just a taste of food, it was a taste of freedom, the taste of the fact that I exist, that I am important, that my body, my stomach, my desires matter. I ate slowly, savoring every bite, washing it all down with black tea from a ceremonial cup. I looked at the blank wall where the calendar hung and realized all these years I had been saving things for a future that might never come. I lived in expectation that someone would appreciate my sacrifice. But sacrifices aren't appreciated, they are used. As I finished, only crumbs were remained on the plate. I felt a fullness I hadn't experienced in a long time, a calm, dignified fullness. I stood up and walked to the sideboard. The place where the spoon case had stood gaped with emptiness. The dust there was slightly lighter, outlining a rectangle. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the long receipt from the gourmet market. I carefully smoothed it out and placed it right in the center of that light rectangle, in place of the family silver. On the receipt, amidst the list of delicacies, the word total was printed in large. I smiled at my reflection in the glass of the sideboard. Dinner, I whispered. It was just dinner. The week flew by like one long sunny day. I woke up not to an alarm clock to run to the cheap store for discounts, but when the sun touched my pillow. I had croissants with butter for breakfast, not empty oatmeal. And so, as I sat in the armchair with a glass of rich red wine, a Cabernet from 2015, advised by the sommelier at the wine boutique, the phone rang. The ring was harsh, demanding. I knew who it was without even picking up. Only Quintessa knew how to call, as if the telephone should apologize for not ringing sooner. Hello? I brought the receiver to my ear, not setting down my glass. Mama! My daughter's voice burst into my silence. In the background, the ocean roared, seagulls screamed, and some rhythmic music played. How are you doing there? Still alive? There was so much feigned concern in her voice, mixed with blatant superiority, that the wine seemed sour for a moment. Alive, Quintessa, quite alive. You're probably bored there alone and hungry, she spoke loudly, shouting over the surf. You boil that grits, but add more water, it's more filling that way. Old Grandma's recipe, remember? I took a sip of wine. The velvety taste returned, washing away the bitterness of her words. I'm managing, I answered calmly. Don't worry. Oh, come on. Don't put on a brave face, she chuckled. I know you've got nothing to eat there, but it's okay. Hold on for another week. By the way, I saw a fridge magnet for you shaped like a dolphin. If, of course, you don't run up the electric bill while I'm gone, because I know you. You'll forget to turn off the light in the bathroom, and I'll have to pay for it later. She spoke to me like an unreasonable child, like a burden that needed to be controlled even from 1,000 miles away. Before, I would have started making excuses. I would have said, no, baby, I'm saving. I don't even turn on the TV. But now, I just smiled at my reflection in the dark window. I'm finding resources, Quintessa, didn't even suspect existed, I uttered, looking at the wine bottle on the table. So don't worry about the lights. Resources, she laughed again, and there was so much smugness in that laugh. What are you talking about? Found some change in the sofa or went to Miss Theodosia for salt? Look, don't embarrass me in front of the neighbors. Don't go around with your hand out. All right, I gotta go. We have a pool party. Don't get bored there with your porridge. Click. She hung up, confident in her complete, undivided power over me. In her picture of the world, I was sitting right now in a dark kitchen, choking on plain porridge, counting the days until her return, so I could gratefully accept a magnet and a new portion of reproaches. She thought she had broken me, that the hunger training was successful. I finished the wine, feeling the warmth spread through my body. Pool party, I repeated, placing the empty glass on the table. Well, I have my own plans, too. I picked up the notebook lying next to the phone. On the open page, a time was already written down. Tomorrow, 11 a.m. sharp. Alistair S. I had planned to sell the wardrobe, that huge oak closet in the hallway that took up half the passage and always snagged my sleeves with its carved corners. It was antique, expensive, but I hated it. It was a dark spot that absorbed light. But after the conversation with Quintessa, I changed my mind. The wardrobe, that's too much hassle. Movers, noise, dust. I wanted something elegant, something that would hit her just as painfully as her words about watering down the grits. I got up and went to the dresser in the bedroom. There, in the top drawer, lay another jewelry box, smaller. I opened it. On a velvet cushion lay a brooch, an antique gold piece in the shape of a twig with leaves, studded with small diamonds and a large dark ruby in the center. This ruby burned like a drop of thick blood. Quintessa adored this brooch. She never asked for permission, just took it when she went on a date or an office party. "Mama, it's vintage, it's all the rage right now," she would say, pinning the brooch to the lapel of her blazer. She considered this thing hers, just like the apartment, just like me. I took the brooch in my hands. The stone was cold, but quickly warmed in my palm. I remembered how Quintessa once lost the clasp from it and didn't even apologize. "Well, fix it, you're a seamstress," she tossed out then, and I fixed it. Tomorrow, Mr. Sterling would come to appraise the wardrobe, but he wouldn't leave with it. In the morning, the antique dealer was precise as always. "Good morning, Miss Yulee," he smiled, tipping his hat. "Ready to part with the giant in the hallway?" I shook my head, inviting him in. "I changed my mind about the wardrobe, Alistair. Changed my mind for now, too much fuss. But I have something else, something more personal." I held out the brooch to him. Mr. Sterling's eyes lit up with professional excitement. He carefully took the piece, held it up to the light, and put on his inevitable loupe. "Oh," he exhaled, "late 19th century, St. Petersburg work, perhaps. No, likely New Orleans Creole craftsmanship. The ruby is natural, unheated, very deep color, and old mine-cut diamonds. This is a piece with character." "How much?" I asked. He named a price. It was twice as for the spoons. It was money one could live on comfortably for 6 months, or treat oneself to 2 weeks of paradise. "It's yours," I said, not bargaining this time. The price was fair, and my desire to get rid of this thing was burning. When Alistair counted out the bills, I looked at the brooch for the last time. It lay on the table, sparkling in a sunbeam. Beautiful, predatory, alien. "You know," Alistair said, putting the brooch into a special pouch, "this item surely has a history." "It does," I nodded, taking the money. "But the history has ended. Now it's just stone and metal." He left, and I was alone again. I looked at the spot in the jewelry box where the ruby used to lie. Emptiness, but this emptiness wasn't frightening. It promised new possibilities. I picked up the phone and dialed the number of a food delivery service from that very restaurant I always walked past, lowering my eyes so I didn't see the prices on the menu displayed on the street. "Good afternoon," I said. "I want to place an order. Yes, delivery. Write this down. Crab and avocado salad, veal medallions with mushroom sauce, and," I thought for a second, remembering Quintessa's words about water in the grits, "and a bottle of champagne, the coldest you have." I hung up and felt a spring uncoil inside me. Quintessa would be back in a week. She would look for her favorite vintage brooch to show off her tan and new jewelry to her girlfriends. Let her look. Meanwhile, I would drink to her health and to the fact that I really did find resources, not in the sofa, but in the self-respect I had finally bought back. The champagne sparkled in the glass, lifting tiny bubbles from the bottom, but the festive mood evaporated suddenly as soon as I opened the bottom drawer of the secretary desk. I was looking for the certificate for a painting, a landscape with a river by an unknown artist from the late 19th century that hung in the living room. Alistair hinted that with papers, the price would be higher. The drawer was stuffed with old receipts, warranty cards for appliances broken long ago, and other paper junk that Quintessa had dumped here for years. I started sorting through the papers, irritably, setting aside instructions for an iron and a hairdryer, and then my fingers hit a thick plastic folder shoved deep under a stack of old Essence magazines. The folder wasn't mine. I never bought such bright red screaming colors. I pulled it out into the light. Inside lay several sheets stapled together. On top was a glossy brochure. Cheap paper, bad printing, blurry photos of smiling old people playing checkers. Restful Meadow State Facility for Veterans and Seniors. The name seemed familiar. I had heard about it somewhere. Miss Theodosia, the neighbor, told terrible things, said it smelled of bleach and boiled cabbage, that the staff was rude, and the old folks lay for days staring at the ceiling because no one cared about them. It was a state institution, the most budget-friendly one with a bad reputation, a place where they send you to wait for the end, to be forgotten. My hands started to shake. I set aside the brochure and picked up the next document. It was a draft, a general power of attorney. In the header, my details. In the agent field, Quintessa Johnson. And below, in fine print, a list of powers. Right to manage all property, sell real estate, represent interests in medical institutions. A date was penciled in the margins. Next month, immediately after her return. The world tilted. I grabbed the edge of the table so I wouldn't fall. The air in the room suddenly became thick and viscous. This wasn't just selfishness. This was a plan, a cold, calculated plan. She wasn't just waiting for me to die to get the inheritance. She was tired of waiting. She decided to check me in to Restful Meadows like an old item to the scrapyard, to free up the apartment, sell the antiques, and live easy on my money while I rotted in a government ward. She smiled at me, took my card, went to the sea at my expense, knowing that in a month she would kick me out of my own home. Tears didn't flow. Instead, a wave of such fury rose inside me that I thought I would scream, but I stayed silent. The fury forged itself into action. If before I sold things just to eat and pamper myself a little, now this was war. I threw the folder back into the drawer, but didn't close it. Let it lie there as a reminder. I grabbed the phone. The ringing seemed infinitely long. "Mr. Sterling." My voice rang like a taut string. "It's Yulie. Have you gone far?" "I'm still in the neighborhood, Yulie," he responded with surprise. "Did something happen? Did you find something else interesting?" "I found a reason," I cut him off. "Come back and bring a truck. We're clearing everything out." "Everything?" Disbelief sounded in his voice. "Mrs. Yulie, are you sure? That is a serious decision." "Absolutely. I'm selling the painting, the clock, the rug, and that service in the buffet. Everything that has value. Come immediately." The next 2 hours passed in a fog. Alistair arrived with 2 sturdy guys. They silently and carefully carried my life out in pieces. The landscape with the river was taken off the wall, leaving a light rectangle on the wallpaper. The antique grandfather clock, whose chiming had measured time in this apartment for the last 50 years, fell silent and was wrapped in bubble wrap. The Persian rug, worn but still luxurious, was rolled into a heavy cylinder. I stood and watched the room empty. With every item carried out, it became easier to breathe, as if they weren't carrying out furniture, but stones from my soul. The apartment was becoming spacious, light, and mine. No longer a museum, just a dwelling. Alistair wrote checks and counted out cash. The sum grew. It was becoming obscenely huge for a pensioner. "Are you sure you won't regret this?" he asked quietly, as the movers carried out the last box of porcelain. "I will regret only one thing, Alistair," I replied, looking at the empty wall, "that I didn't do this sooner." When the door closed behind them, I was left alone in the echoing hallway. In my hands was a bag stuffed with money, a real fortune. I didn't delay. First, I called a cleaning company. I need a deep clean, washing windows, walls, floors, everything, completely, so that not a speck of dust remains, so it smells of freshness, not old age. "Can a crew come today? I'll pay double." The dispatcher on the other end choked, but quickly agreed. Then I opened the website of an elite gourmet boutique, the kind that delivers groceries to stars and moguls. I scrolled through the catalog without looking at prices. Black caviar, beluga, jars of 4 ounces, 8 ounces, add to cart. Truffles, white, seasonal, add to cart. Foie gras, whole duck liver, add to cart. Vintage champagne, Dom Perignon, exotic fruits, dragon fruit, mangosteen, papaya, add to cart. Cheeses, cured meats, handmade chocolate. I clicked and clicked until the order total exceeded the cost of my annual maintenance at that Restful Meadows nursing home. "Delivery today," I told the operator, "as soon as possible." By evening, the apartment shone. The windows were crystal clear, letting in the setting sun, which now flooded the empty living room with golden light. It smelled of expensive cleaning products and lilies. I ordered a huge bouquet just for beauty, The courier rang the doorbell. He wasn't alone. There were 2 of them, struggling to carry huge thermal boxes. We went into the kitchen. The old, reliable Kelvinator that hummed like a tractor stood in the corner. I threw open its door. Inside was empty and clean. Only a lonely bulb illuminated the white shelves. "Load it up," I commanded. The couriers exchanged glances, but started working. Blue tin jars of caviar stood in neat rows on the top shelf. Next to them lay blocks of golden butter and packages of truffles. The middle shelf filled with cheeses and meat delicacies. In the vegetable drawer, instead of the usual carrots and beets, bright alien fruits now showed off. Bottles of champagne lay on their sides, taking up the special rack. The fridge was filling up. It was becoming heavy, dense, saturated. The shelves sagged barely noticeably under the weight of luxury. There was enough food here for a company of soldiers, if those soldiers ate exclusively delicacies. "Anything else?" the courier asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Yes," I said. "Try to squeeze that box of Belgian chocolates on the door." When they finished, the fridge was packed to the gills. There wasn't room for even a matchbox. This wasn't a refrigerator. It was Ali Baba's cave, only edible. I paid, gave a generous tip, and closed the door behind them. I walked to the fridge, grabbed the handle, opened it. The light of the bulb reflected in the gold foil of the champagne and the glossy sides of the caviar jars. The cold air smelled not of soup and medicine, but of wealth. I stood and looked at this abundance. This was my answer, my shield, my sword. Quintessa wanted to send me to the scrapyard to get the inheritance. Well, the inheritance is now here, in this fridge, chilled and ready for consumption, but not by her. I closed the door. The click of the latch sounded like a verdict.
The wait wasn't long. 2 weeks of silence ended exactly at noon when a key scratched in the lock. I was sitting in the kitchen with my back to the hallway, drinking tea. No, tea. Real Darjeeling, tart and fragrant. The cup in my hands was thin, almost transparent. I didn't flinch. I waited. The door swung open with a crash, hitting the wall. The noise of the street, the smell of airplane fuel and hot asphalt burst into the apartment. "Mama, I'm home!" Quintessa's voice boomed like a victor's fanfare. "I hope you've humbled yourself enough to apologize for your behavior before I left. I'm tired from the trip and don't want to listen to your whining." The sound of heavy suitcase wheels dragging across the parquet floor followed. She entered expecting the usual semi-darkness, the smell of medicine and my hunched figure rushing to meet her with slippers in hand. She expected to see her victim, broken, hungry, and guilty, but instead she was met by a smell, not of mustiness, but of fresh lilies, a huge bouquet of which stood in a vase on the floor, and the subtle trail of my new perfume, sandalwood and jasmine. Quintessa froze on the threshold. I heard her sniffing the air, trying to understand what was happening. "What is that smell?" she asked suspiciously. "Did you spill air freshener or something?" She took a step forward and suddenly stopped. The sound of her heels was too echoing. "Wait," a note of confusion slipped into her voice. "Why is it so spacious in here?" She looked around. Her gaze slid over the floor, where the heavy Persian rug, which always collected dust, was no longer. She looked at the corner where grandfather's floor clock used to stand, its ticking driving her crazy in childhood. Now it was empty there, just a clean, light wall. "Mama," she called out, quieter now, but immediately shook her head, driving away the strange feeling of wrongness. "Okay, we'll figure out later where you shoved everything again. I'm hungry as a wolf. They fed us some garbage on the plane." She dropped her purse right on the floor and marched decisively toward the kitchen. I didn't even turn around. I just took another sip of tea and placed the cup on the saucer. Clink. The sound was quiet but distinct. Quintessa walked into the kitchen. She was tanned to redness. Her nose was peeling. She was wearing a bright sundress with a floral print that looked alien in this strict, clean kitchen. "So, what do we have?" she asked aggressively, not really greeting me. "I bet you didn't cook anything except your porridge. I could eat a sandwich right now, even with butter, if yours hasn't gone rancid." She walked past me like I was furniture. I sat straight, squaring my shoulders in a new silk robe of emerald color, but she didn't notice the robe or my calmness. She was led by hunger and the habit of commanding. She walked up to the refrigerator. Her hand, with chipped nail polish, reached for the handle. She had already taken a breath to start a tirade about what a bad hostess I was, how tired she was of carrying everything on her shoulders, and how empty our fridge was. "Open it," I said quietly. Quintessa didn't hear or didn't pay attention. She yanked the door toward herself with such force as if she wanted to rip it off. The door flew open, the light flared up, and Quintessa screamed. It wasn't a cry of pain, it was a yelp of pure animal terror and misunderstanding. She recoiled as if she saw the head of Medusa, the Gorgon, inside. Before her, tightly packed from bottom to top, lay her inheritance. At eye level towered neat stacks of blue tin jars, black caviar, beluga, the most expensive, the rarest. There were many of them. Dozens of jars shining under the electric light. Lower down on the shelf, where cabbage usually rotted, lay misted bottles of Dom Perignon. Labels with vintage years looked at her with silent reproach. Wheels of blue cheese wrapped in craft paper. Truffles looking like precious stones in special glass flasks. Bright pink sides of dragon fruit. Yellow mangoes. Purple mangosteen. A rite of colors this kitchen had never seen. On the door, instead of ketchup and mayonnaise, crowded boxes of Belgian chocolates and jars of foie gras. The refrigerator burst. It groaned with abundance. It was a feast during a plague. But the plague was the poverty I had banished. Quintessa stood with her hands pressed to her mouth. Her eyes were wide open, shock splashing in them. She shifted her gaze from the caviar to the champagne, from the champagne to the truffles. Her brain refused to process the information. A poor pensioner who was supposed to be boiling grits in water could not have the refrigerator of an Arab sheikh. "What?" she squeezed out. Her voice broke into a squeal. "What is this?" She reached out a trembling hand.